The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in as Jane Martinez gripped the marble counter. Her knuckles had gone white. Through the arched doorway, she watched her boyfriend Nick telling some story about his golf game. The Richardsons hanging on every word, their laughter too loud, too bright. The Christmas lights blinked in rhythm with her racing pulse. She'd checked the restraining order that morning. Again. Like she had every morning for 3 days straight. Valid through 2033. David imprisoned until at least 2031. The numbers should have comforted her. Instead, they felt like lies written on official paper, as if the state's promises meant anything at all. "Baby, you're going to break that glass." Nick's voice startled her. She looked down. The wine glass in her hand had developed a hairline crack under her grip. "Sorry, I'm just anxious, I know." He kissed her forehead, his lips warm. He smelled like the expensive aftershave she'd given him for his birthday, like safety, like the future she was trying to build. "But he's locked up. He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here, with me." The doorbell's chime cut through the Christmas music like a scream. Jane's entire body turned to ice. "Relax," Nick said, squeezing her hand. "Probably the Johnsons from across the street. I think I mentioned the party to them last week." But Jane couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She was watching Nick walk toward the front door, watching through the frosted glass as a shadow resolved itself into a shape she knew better than her own reflection. Too tall, too broad. The way he stood with his weight on his left leg because of the football injury from college. Nick opened the door. David stood on the welcome mat, snow melting in his dark hair. He wore the leather jacket, the same one he'd worn when he'd beaten her unconscious, when the paramedics had cut it off her to check for injuries, when they'd returned it to him as evidence at the trial. She could see the stains on the collar if she looked hard enough. Her blood had soaked into the leather grain, permanent as a signature. "Evening," David said pleasantly. His smile was the one from their wedding photos. "Is Jane home?" The glass shattered in her hand. "Who the hell are you?" Nick's voice had changed, gone hard and flat. "I'm her husband. Well, technically still married. These things take time in the courts, don't they?" David's eyes found Jane over Nick's shoulder. "Hello, sweetheart. Miss me?" "You need to leave." Nick moved to block the doorway completely. "Right now." "That's not very hospitable. It's Christmas Eve. Surely you have room for one more guest." "The restraining order." Jane finally found her voice, though it came out thin and reedy. "You're supposed to be in prison. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of me." David pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, waved it casually. "Funny story about that. Turns out, someone in the corrections department filed my paperwork under the wrong inmate number. Been processing paroles for the wrong David Martinez for 4 years. They discovered it last week. Had to let me go. Legal liability, they said. Wrongful imprisonment." "That's impossible." "You'd think so, wouldn't you? But here I am, free as a bird. The state even gave me a check for my troubles. $20,000 for my inconvenience." His smile widened. "I spent some of it on these." He pulled out a bouquet of roses from behind his back. Dead roses, brown and dried, tied with black ribbon. The same flowers he'd sent her the day before he'd put her in the hospital. Nick slammed the door. The lock clicked. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then David's fist hit the door so hard the hinges rattled. "Jane!" His voice had transformed, the pleasant mask ripped away. "Jane, you open this door right now!" The party guests had gone silent. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. "I'm calling the police," Nick said, pulling out his cell. The window exploded inward. David came through a shower of glass, rolling across the hardwood floor and coming up in a crouch. His hands were bleeding, ribbons of skin hanging from his palms where the glass had sliced him. He didn't seem to notice. "I said that I wanted to talk to my wife!" Someone screamed. The Richardson woman, Jane thought distantly. She watched Nick rush David, watched her boyfriend, who'd played defensive tackle in college, who'd been so proud of his strength, get tossed aside like a child's doll. Nick's head connected with the wall with a sound like a melon dropping. Then David was moving toward her. Jane ran. She made it to the kitchen, her hands scrabbling for anything, a knife, a pan, anything. But David was faster. His bloody hand caught her hair, yanked her backward. She felt strands rip from her scalp. 4 years, he hissed in her ear. His breath was hot and smelled like mint. He'd always been meticulous about his breath. 4 years I spent in that cage because you couldn't keep your mouth shut, because you had to go crying to the police about our private business. You nearly killed me. I was disciplining you. That's what husbands do. That's what marriage means. But you never understood that, did you? You never understood your place. Through the doorway, Jane could see the party guests huddled together. Nick was sitting up, blood pouring from his temple, trying to stand. No one was moving to help. They were frozen, shocked, waiting for someone else to be the hero. David dragged her back toward the living room. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, dripping with lights and ornaments, and the little glass angel her mother had given her before she died. "Here's what we're going to do," David said conversationally, as if they were discussing dinner plans. "You're going to tell all these people that this is a misunderstanding, that we're working on our marriage, that you want them to leave so we can talk privately. And then..." Jane drove her elbow into his solar plexus. The breath went out of him in a whoosh. His grip loosened just enough. She twisted, dropped, rolled away. Her hand found one of the heavy glass ornaments that had fallen from the tree. David lunged. Jane swung. The ornament shattered against his face, drawing a line of blood from his eyebrow to his jaw. He stumbled, and Jane ran again, this time toward the fireplace. The poker was wrought iron, heavy and cold in her hands. "Jane, don't!" Nick had finally made it to his feet, was stumbling toward them. David charged. Jane swung the poker. It connected with his knee. The crack was audible. David went down screaming, clutching his leg. "You bitch! You broke my fucking leg!" Jane raised the poker again, and again, and again. She hit him in the ribs, in the shoulder, across the back when he tried to curl into a ball. Each impact sent vibrations up her arms, jolting her teeth. She couldn't stop, couldn't hear the screaming anymore, couldn't hear Nick yelling her name, couldn't hear anything except the sound of metal on flesh and bone. 4 years of nightmares, 4 years of flinching at shadows, 4 years of therapy and medication and learning to trust again. She brought the poker down on his head. David stopped moving. Jane stood over him, panting, the poker dripping red onto her cream carpet. The Christmas lights reflected in the spreading pool beneath his skull, turning it into a kaleidoscope of colors. Someone was sobbing, multiple someones. Nick approached slowly, hands out like he was approaching a wild animal. "Jane, baby. Put it down. It's over. You can put it down now." She looked at the poker in her hands as if seeing it for the first time. "He broke into our house," she said. Her voice sounded wrong, hollow. "He attacked us. This was self-defense." I know it was. The police, they'll understand. Everyone saw it." But Jane was looking at David's face, at the blood, at the way his eyes were still open, still staring at her with that same expression of wounded outrage he'd worn every time she'd made him angry. Even in death, he looked like he thought he was the victim. The sirens came eventually. The police, the paramedics who confirmed what everyone already knew. They wrapped Jane in a blanket and asked her questions she answered in monosyllables. They took statements from the guests. They photographed the broken window, the blood, the poker. They told her she was brave. They told her it was justified. They told her she was safe now. But Jane knew better. Because as they wheeled David's body out in a black bag, she saw his hand slip free of the zipper, saw his fingers twitch, saw his lips move, forming words only she could hear across the distance. Not done yet. The paramedic quickly tucked the hand back inside, zipped the bag completely closed. But Jane had seen. And that night, after the police left and the guests went home and Nick fell asleep with his arm around her like a promise of protection, Jane lay awake listening. Listening for footsteps on the stairs, listening for breathing at the door, listening for David to come back. Because men like David always came back. The restraining order hadn't stopped him. Prison hadn't stopped him. Death wouldn't stop him either. At 3 a.m., she heard scratching at the bedroom window. Nick slept on, exhausted. Jane got up slowly, picked up the poker she'd hidden under the bed. She walked to the window and looked out. Nothing. Just snow falling softly in the yellow glow of the streetlights. But on the glass, written in the frost, soon. Jane closed the curtains and went back to bed. She didn't sleep. She never slept on Christmas Eve anymore. The police arrived to find Martha sitting calmly on Santa's throne, Timothy on her lap, the pistol resting on her knee. 2 dead Santas on the floor, one live one babbling excuses and begging not to be shot. The store manager was hysterical. The jewelry clerk wouldn't stop crying. Martha just rocked Timothy gently and hummed Silent Night. The detective who interviewed her was young, probably not even 30. He kept looking at the bodies, then at Martha, then back at the bodies, like he couldn't reconcile the two. "Ma'am," he said finally, those were very precise shots. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My husband taught me, before Korea took him." "You saved a lot of lives tonight." "I protected my grandson. The rest of you were incidental." The detective blinked, then laughed, nervous and high-pitched. "Right. Well, we'll need a full statement, but, ma'am, you're a hero." "I'm a grandmother who knows how to use a gun. Those aren't the same thing." They let her go home after 2 hours of questions. The newspaper ran the story on the front page. Local grandmother stops Christmas robbery. They called her the guardian angel of Kellerman's. Martha burned the newspaper because the story didn't end at the department store. 2 days after Christmas, she received a package, no return address. Inside was a single item, a photograph. It showed Martha sitting on Santa's throne, holding Timothy, but it had been taken from outside the store through the window, before the shooting started. Someone had been watching. Someone had photographed her before the robbery began. Written on the back in neat handwriting, 3 down, 4 to go. Martha's blood turned to ice. She went to the police, showed them the photograph. They took it seriously, sent it to the lab for analysis, increased patrols around her neighborhood, told her to call if anything suspicious happened. Nothing did. For 3 weeks, everything was normal. Then Martha's daughter Ellen didn't show up for Sunday dinner. The police found her car in a parking garage downtown. No sign of struggle, no blood, just her purse sitting on the passenger seat, wallet and keys still inside. Ellen was never found. The police said she probably ran off. Having a mother who'd killed 2 men, even in self-defense, could be traumatic. People handled trauma in different ways. Martha knew better. She received another photograph the day after the police closed the case. This one showed Ellen walking to her car, the same parking garage, taken minutes before she disappeared. Written on the back, 3 down, 3 to go. Martha started carrying the pistol everywhere, started checking the locks twice, started watching the shadows. Timothy's father, Ellen's ex-husband, died in a house fire 6 months later. The investigators ruled it accidental, a cigarette left burning. Another photograph arrived. 3 down, 2 to go. Martha stopped sleeping. She'd sit in her armchair all night, pistol in her lap, watching the door, waiting. She hired private investigators. They found nothing. She begged the police to reopen the cases, They refused. No evidence of foul play, they said, just a series of tragic coincidences. 3 years after the robbery, Timothy was killed in a car accident, 15 years old. His brakes had failed on a mountain road. The police found nothing wrong with the car. Just bad luck, they said. Martha received no photograph this time, just a Christmas card. Inside, in the same neat handwriting, 3 down, 1 to go. Merry Christmas. Martha Louise Henderson didn't believe in coincidences. 70 years on this earth had taught her that patterns meant something, that when things lined up too neatly, it usually meant someone was trying to pull something over on you. So when 3 Santa Clauses showed up at Kellerman's department store on Christmas Eve 1963, all within 10 minutes of each other, Martha's hand moved instinctively to her purse. The pistol was still there, loaded, ready. "Grandma, look!" Her grandson Timothy tugged at her sleeve, pointing at the elaborate Christmas display. "Santa's here!" Indeed he was. The first Santa sat on an enormous throne of painted plywood and glitter, his beard yellowed with tobacco stains, his breath carrying the sour tang of whiskey even from 20 feet away. Timothy didn't notice. He was 7 and still believed, still thought the man in the red suit was magic instead of a drunk the store paid minimum wage. 5 minutes, Martha told him, then we need to get home before the roads get bad. The snow had been falling since morning, and the radio was predicting 8 inches by midnight. Most shoppers had already fled for home. The store was nearly deserted, just a handful of last-minute desperate souls and the employees counting down the minutes until closing. Martha positioned herself near the toy section, where she could watch Timothy and keep an eye on the exits. Old habits. Her late husband had been military, had taught her to always know where the doors were, to watch for threats, to trust her instincts. Right now, her instincts were screaming. The second Santa came through the employee entrance, walking with purpose toward the Christmas display. Same costume as the first, red suit, black boots, white beard, but younger, stronger, moving with the controlled grace of someone who knew how to use their body as a weapon. Martha's hand slipped into her purse. The third Santa entered through the main doors, shaking snow from his shoulders. He headed straight for the jewelry counter, barely glancing at the Christmas display. 3 Santas, different doors, different objectives. Martha's fingers wrapped around the pistol grip. Timothy climbed onto the drunk Santa's lap, chattering about trains and toy soldiers. The drunk Santa nodded along, clearly not listening, his eyes glazed and distant. The second Santa reached the display. He spoke briefly to the first, too quiet for Martha to hear. The first Santa's expression changed, fear flickering across his face before he masked it with a professional smile. The third Santa was talking to the jewelry clerk, a young woman who kept glancing nervously at the clock. Then the second Santa reached into his coat. Martha was already moving before the shotgun cleared the fabric. "Everybody down!" The second Santa's voice boomed through the store. "This is a robbery. Do exactly what I say and nobody gets hurt." The jewelry clerk screamed. The few remaining shoppers hit the floor. Timothy froze on the first Santa's lap. Martha pulled the trigger. The boom was deafening in the enclosed space. The second Santa spun, a look of absolute shock on his face as blood blossomed across his chest. The shotgun clattered to the floor. "Grandma!" Timothy's voice was very small. The third Santa was pulling something from his own coat, another gun, and Martha was already pivoting, already squeezing the trigger again. This bullet caught him in the throat. He went down gurgling, hands scrabbling at his neck as blood sprayed across the jewelry display. The first Santa, the drunk one, was scrambling backward, hands raised. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know they were planning this. They told me it was just..." "Shut up." Martha kept the gun trained on him as she moved toward Timothy. "Timothy, come here, right now." Her grandson climbed down from the throne on shaking legs and ran to her. She pushed him behind her, never taking her eyes off the first Santa. The second Santa was making wet, desperate sounds, trying to drag himself toward the shotgun. Martha walked over and kicked it away. She looked down at him dispassionately. "You picked the wrong grandmother." She watched while he died. Martha knew who it was now, had known for a while really, but hadn't wanted to believe it. The first Santa, the drunk one, the one who'd begged for his life. They'd let him go with a slap on the wrist, accessory to attempted robbery, time served, probation. He'd claimed ignorance, said he had no idea his drinking buddies were planning to rob the store, said they'd threatened him, forced him to participate. The police had believed him. Martha hadn't. She'd watched him walk out of that courtroom and she'd known, with the certainty that comes from 70 years of reading people, that he was lying. She'd also known his name, Frank Delacroix. And now she knew what he was doing. He was taking everything she loved, one piece at a time, making her watch as her family disappeared, as Timothy grew up without a mother, as he died before becoming a man. This was his revenge for the two she'd killed, for ruining his robbery, for humiliating him in front of the police and the newspapers and everyone who'd called her a hero. Martha was 83 when she decided to end it. She waited until Christmas Eve, exactly 20 years after the robbery. She dressed in her best coat, loaded her pistol, and took a taxi to the address she'd memorized years ago. Frank Delacroix lived in a basement apartment in the bad part of town, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and nobody calls the police. Martha knocked on his door at midnight. He answered in a stained undershirt and boxers, a beer in one hand. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Mrs. Henderson, I've been expecting you." "I know what you did." "Do you? Prove it." "I don't need to prove it. I just need to end it." She raised the pistol. Frank didn't move, didn't try to run or beg or fight. He just stood there, smiling, that same empty smile. "Go ahead," he said. "Shoot me. Then it'll be 4 dead bodies on your conscience. Then you'll be the monster instead of me." Martha's finger tightened on the trigger. "They'll arrest you this time. No self-defense claim, just a crazy old lady who murdered a man in his own home on Christmas Eve. You'll die in prison, alone, forgotten, and I'll still have won, because I took everything from you first. You took my family. I took nothing. I just helped fate along. Your daughter was always unstable. Ellen's ex-husband was always careless with cigarettes. And Timothy, that boy was a terrible driver. The photographs. What photographs? I never sent you any photographs, Mrs. Henderson. You're a confused old woman who's created an elaborate conspiracy theory to explain away a series of tragic accidents. That's what the police will say. That's what everyone will say." He was right. Martha lowered the gun. "There it is," Frank said softly. "That moment when you realize you can't win, that justice is a fairy tale we tell children, that sometimes the bad guys get away with it." "You're right," Martha said. "Sometimes they do." She turned and walked away. She made it 3 steps before she heard the door close behind her. She made it to the sidewalk before she heard the explosion. The gas leak had been slow, deliberate, invisible. She'd started it while Frank was answering the door, cracking the valve on the ancient furnace in the hallway just enough. All it had taken was a spark. Frank's cigarette lighter, the one he'd pulled out to light up the moment he'd closed the door, thinking he'd won. The building went up like a matchbook. Martha kept walking. Behind her, neighbors were emerging from apartments, screaming, calling 911. Fire trucks would come. Investigators would comb through the wreckage. They'd find Frank Delacroix's body in the rubble. They'd rule it an accident. Faulty furnace, old building, tragic but predictable. Just like Ellen's disappearance, just like the house fire, just like Timothy's crash. Sometimes, Martha thought, as she climbed into a waiting taxi, the bad guys got away with it. And sometimes, the good guys learned to play by the bad guys' rules. She went home, made herself a cup of tea, sat in her armchair with her pistol in her lap. That Christmas morning, Martha received one final package. Inside was a single photograph, the original one Frank had sent her 20 years ago, showing her on Santa's throne. But someone had drawn additions in red ink. 4 figures in the background, shadowy, barely visible, and written across the bottom, "We were 7, you only stopped 3. Merry Christmas, guardian angel." Martha stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she loaded her pistol, put on her coat, and walked out into the snow. She had 4 more names to find, and the rest of her life to find them. I was 9 years old when I waved at a killer. Our apartment in Crown Heights was barely big enough for 1 person, let alone 2. Mom and I shared the fold-out couch, her on one end and me on the other, our feet meeting in the middle. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with 3 other families who all had their own problems and pretended not to hear through the thin walls. But we had a window. That was something. The window faced the fire escape, and on the clearest nights you could see stars. Not many. The city lights drowned most of them out, but enough. Mom said stars were important. They reminded you there was something bigger than this apartment, this neighborhood, this life. It was December 23rd, 1988. Mom was pulling a double shift at Mount Sinai. Holiday pay meant we'd eat something besides ramen in January. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B was supposed to watch me, but she'd fallen asleep in front of the TV around 11, her snoring louder than Carson's monologue. I'd snuck back upstairs. I wasn't supposed to, but I was 9 and stupid, and convinced I'd catch a glimpse of Santa if I just stayed awake long enough. The fire escape was covered in ice, each railing decorated with icicles that caught the streetlights and threw rainbows across the rusted metal. Beautiful in the way that only dangerous things can be. I pressed my face against the glass, breath fogging the window, and waited. I saw him coming up. At first, I thought the red was his suit, Santa's suit. The same bright red from all the pictures and movies and department store displays. But red doesn't glisten like that. Red doesn't drip. He was moving slowly, dragging himself up the fire escape, one agonizing step at a time. One hand gripped the railing while the other clutched his side, trying to hold something in. His beard hung crooked, attached by one elastic band. His hat was gone. And his face. His face looked like someone had tried to erase it. Even at 9, I knew what a broken nose looked like. Tommy Chen in my class had gotten one playing baseball, and his face had swollen up purple and wrong. But this was worse. This man's face was a topography of violence, all swelling and splits and colors that faces shouldn't be. He reached my window, stopped, swayed. Then his eye, the one that could still open, found me through the glass. I should have screamed, should have run to Mrs. Rodriguez or called 911 or done literally anything except what I actually did. I raised my hand and waved. The man blinked. His ruined face arranged itself into something that might have been a smile if smiles could look like open wounds. He raised his hand, the bloody one, and waved back. Then he pressed his finger to his lips, the universal gesture. Shh, don't tell. I nodded. I don't know why. Maybe because I was 9 and he was dressed like Santa, and some part of my child brain still couldn't reconcile the horror in front of me with the concept of danger. Or maybe because there was something in his eye, that one functioning eye that looked so desperately human, so entirely broken that even at 9 I recognized it as something beyond my understanding. He reached into his coat. For one wild second, I thought he might actually pull out a present, that this would transform into a weird Christmas story I'd tell at parties when I grew up. Instead, he pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper and butcher's twine. The paper was soaked through, dark and wet and wrong. He set it carefully on the fire escape, right outside my window. Then he touched 2 fingers to his forehead in this strange salute, military maybe, or something else, and continued climbing. I watched him go, up past the 5th floor, past the 6th, until he disappeared over the edge of the roof. The package sat there, bleeding into the ice. I stared at it, at the way the streetlights made the wet carts gleam, at the way the twine was tied in a perfect bow, like someone had taken care with the wrapping despite everything else. The sirens started maybe 5 minutes later. Multiple cars, all converging on our building, the whole street lit up in red and blue, colors splashing across my window, across the fire escape, across the package. I heard pounding on doors, Mrs. Rodriguez's voice, shrill with panic. "He's with me! The boy's with me!" But I wasn't with Mrs. Rodriguez. I was upstairs, watching police officers climb onto the fire escape with their guns drawn. "Jesus Christ!" One of them stopped next to my window. He was looking at the package. "Captain, up here!" More cops came. They stood in a circle around the package, all looking down at it like it might explode. "Don't touch it. We need forensics." "What is it?" I don't know. One cop crouched down, used a pen to lift the corner of the paper. His face went gray. "Get the kid out of there," he said, not looking up. "Clear this whole floor. Actually, clear the whole goddamn building." But I was already ducking below the windowsill, my heart hammering, because I'd seen his face. I'd seen the way his expression had changed from confusion to horror to something that looked like he might be sick. What had Santa left me? They evacuated the building. Mrs. Rodriguez found me in our apartment and dragged me downstairs, her fingers like claws on my arm. Outside, in the cold and the flashing lights, she shook me and demanded to know how I'd gotten past her. I said I'd sleepwalked. She didn't believe me, but what could she say? Mom came home at dawn. I watched her face as the police told her what had happened in the building, watched it drain of color and then flush red with fear and anger. She held me so tight I couldn't breathe. They didn't tell us what was in the package, not then. Maybe they thought we were too young, too fragile. Maybe they just didn't want to say it out loud. But I heard things, bits and pieces from the neighbors gossiping, from the TV news reporters who camped outside our building for days. Patricia Gomez, 3rd floor, 29 years old, 2 kids. Her ex-husband had shown up on Christmas Eve. There'd been a fight. The kids were asleep in the next room when he started stabbing her. 17 times. Then he'd panicked, put on his kid's Santa costume, the one they were supposed to wear to the church pageant, and run. They found him on the roof at sunrise, frozen to death, still in the costume. The cold had killed him slower than he killed her. And the package. I didn't learn what was in it until years later, when I was old enough to file a Freedom of Information request, when I was old enough to handle the truth, or so I thought. Patricia Gomez's heart. He'd cut it out, carved it out, and wrapped it in brown paper like a Christmas present, and he'd left it outside my window. Because his kids were sleeping and he couldn't wake them, couldn't show them what Daddy had done. So he'd found another kid, me, a witness, a confidant, a participant in his nightmare. I'd waved at him. I'd watched him climb away, leaving his crime scene gift on my fire escape like it was a fucking Hershey's Kiss. Mom never talked about it. We moved 3 months later to a different apartment in a different neighborhood, away from the fire escape, away from the memories, away from the building where Patricia Gomez's kids had woken up on Christmas morning to find their mother dead and their father frozen on the roof in their costume. But I carried it with me. I carried the memory of that wave, of his ruined face arranging itself into something like gratitude when I'd acknowledged him, when I'd validated his existence in that moment between murder and death. I'd made him feel human. I'd given him that. And sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I'd screamed instead, would it have changed anything? Would Patricia Gomez still be alive? Would her ex-husband have panicked and run sooner, maybe survived the cold? Or would he have come through my window instead, adding one more victim to his count? I was 35 when I finally went back. The building was still there, though the neighborhood had changed, gentrified. The bodega on the corner was now an organic grocery store. The check cashing place was a yoga studio. But the fire escape was the same. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at what had been our window. 4th floor, counting from the right. A child's face appeared in the glass, maybe 7 or 8. They were pressing their face against the window the same way I had, watching the street below. I wondered if they knew what had happened here, if their parents had told them, or if it was just another old building with old stories that didn't matter anymore. The child saw me looking up, raised their hand, waved. I waved back. Then I turned and walked away. Because some ghosts can't be exorcised. Some moments of connection, even horrible ones, become part of who you are. You carry them in your bones, in the way you flinch at Santa costumes and avoid fire escapes, and wake up at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve listening for sounds that never come. You carry them, and you learn to live with them, and you hope, desperately, irrationally hope, that the children pressing their faces against windows never have to wave at someone covered in blood. But you know, with the certainty that comes from experience, that some of them will. Because horror doesn't take holidays, and Christmas is just another night when bad things happen to good people. I haven't celebrated Christmas in 26 years. I don't plan to start. Emily Bisset had stopped praying the day her husband's wedding ring arrived in the mail. That was 1961. The ring had come wrapped in a page from the Quran, the Arabic script beautiful and incomprehensible to her French eyes. No note, no explanation. Just the ring and the holy text and the understanding that her husband, proud, stupid Philippe, was never coming home from Algeria. She'd been 34. Her son, André, had been 4 years old, too young to understand that Papa wasn't coming back, that the war France insisted wasn't a war had swallowed him whole. Now Emily was 76, and André was sending his regrets. He wouldn't be home for Christmas after all. Work emergency in Algiers. So sorry, Maman. Next year, he promised. Next year. Emily had spent 3 days preparing for his visit. His favorite foods, cassoulet and tarte tatin, fresh linens on his childhood bed, the special wine Philippe had smuggled from Algeria before everything went to hell, saved for 40 years for a special occasion. She stood in her kitchen in the Latin Quarter, surrounded by all this preparation, and laughed until she cried. Then the doorbell rang. The courier wouldn't look at her. Young man, Pakistani or Moroccan maybe, clutching a clipboard with white knuckles. Package for Madame Bisset? That's me. Sign here, please. The package was large, the size of a hat box roughly, heavy enough that she grunted picking it up. The paper was brown, industrial, tied with actual rope like something from another era. There was no return address, just her name in block letters, Emily Bisset. Who sent this? She asked, but the courier was already gone, fleeing down the stairs like the devil was behind him. Emily brought the package inside, set it on her kitchen table, right where André's place setting should be. The paper was stiff in places. When she touched it, her fingers came away tacky. She knew that feeling. Blood dry, sticky, takes on a particular texture. If you've cleaned it once, you recognize it forever. Emily's hands shook as she unwrapped the package. The skull was professionally cleaned, bleached bone white, every trace of tissue removed with surgical precision. The teeth were intact, straight, with a small gap between the front two that André had been self-conscious about as a teenager. She'd paid for braces when she could barely afford food. The bullet hole was in the right temple. Clean entry, no exit wound visible from this angle. Professional work. Emily set the skull on her table and sat down across from it. "Bonjour, mon fils," she whispered. The skull stared back with empty sockets. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't call the police or her neighbors or anyone who might help. She just sat there, in her kitchen that smelled like cassoulet and burned dreams, and looked at what remained of her son. Hours passed. The winter sun set. The street outside came alive with Christmas preparations. Children laughing, couples arguing about which restaurant to try, someone singing Petit Papa Noël off-key and drunk. Life continued, indifferent. When it was fully dark, Emily stood. She walked to her bedroom and retrieved the shoebox from the top shelf of her closet. Inside, Philippe's service pistol, a list of names in his handwriting, and a letter he'd written her before leaving for Algeria, to be opened only if he didn't return. She'd opened it in 1961, after the ring arrived. The letter had explained everything: his work in Algeria, the interrogations, the torture, the systematic brutality of France's attempt to hold on to a colony that no longer wanted them. It had named names, victims, collaborators. It had detailed crimes that France still refused to acknowledge, that were still officially classified as police actions. Philippe had been thorough. He'd known what he was doing was wrong, had done it anyway because orders were orders, and Algeria was French, and civilization had to be protected from the barbarians. He'd written it all down: his confession, his insurance policy. "If something happens to me," the letter ended, "use this to protect André. They'll come for him eventually. The sins of the father, as the priests say. Use this to negotiate, to survive." Emily had kept the letter, kept the list, kept the pistol loaded. And she'd waited. She'd watched André grow up proud of his father's military service, watched him romanticize the war, call it necessary, repeat all the same justifications Philippe had used. She'd tried to warn him, begged him not to take the teaching position in Algiers, showed him the list, tried to make him understand that some debts transcended time. He'd laughed, called her paranoid, said the war was 40 years ago and nobody cared anymore. Now his skull sat on her kitchen table. Emily loaded the pistol, put on her coat, wrapped the skull carefully in her best silk scarf. Then she went downstairs. The shop below her apartment belonged to Philippe's family for 3 generations. Spices imported from North Africa, turmeric and cumin and Ras El Hanout, the same trade that made them wealthy enough to send Philippe to military school. Blood and spice, Emily thought, the twin pillars of empire. She unlocked the shop and descended into the basement, found the metal box hidden behind jars of peppercorns that hadn't sold since 1960. Inside, photographs, documents, evidence of everything Philippe had done. Names, dates, locations, proof of torture, of murders, of mass graves and systematic brutality. Her insurance policy, her leverage. She took it upstairs and spent Christmas Eve writing letters to newspapers, to human rights organizations, to the Algerian embassy, to every person and institution that might care about Philippe's crimes. She included copies of everything, photocopies of the photographs showing her husband in uniform, standing over bound prisoners, photocopies of his orders, photocopies of his confession. She named names, documented dates, provided coordinates of mass graves. Everything. When she finished, dawn was breaking. Church bells were ringing, calling the faithful to Christmas Mass. Emily sealed the letters, addressed them, and stacked them on her desk. Then she took André's skull to the bathroom, washed it in warm water, and dried it gently with a clean towel. "I'm sorry," she told him. "I'm sorry your father was who he was. I'm sorry you inherited his pride along with his debt. I'm sorry the world works this way." The skull said nothing. Someone knocked on her door. Emily knew, the way mothers always know, who it would be. She opened the door. 3 men stood in the hallway, middle-aged, well-dressed, unremarkable. but Émilie saw the ghost of Malik Hadj in their features. Malik Hadj, who Philippe executed in 1960 for the crime of hiding resistance fighters. Malik Hadj, who'd had 3 sons, who died in front of those sons, who'd apparently raised them to remember. Madame Bisset, the oldest one said, his French was perfect, educated, completely without accent. We need to discuss your son. I know why you're here. Do you? You killed him because of what my husband did, because you believe in blood debt, because 40 years isn't long enough to forget. The man smiled. You understand perfectly. And now you're here to kill me. No, he shook his head. We're here to offer you a choice. Émilie waited. Your husband murdered our grandfather. Your son, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Your son made certain choices in Algiers, choices that suggested he shared his father's beliefs about our people, about our culture, about our right to exist as equals. My son was a teacher. Your son taught the children of revolutionaries that their language was inferior, that their history was barbaric, that they should be grateful France had civilized them. The man's voice remained level, controlled, professional. He taught French supremacy disguised as French literature. He was your husband's work continued by other means. Émilie's throat closed. We have proof, the man continued. Letters, lesson plans, proposals for expanding French language requirements in Algerian schools. Your son was quite prolific in his writings about restoring French cultural influence. He handed her an envelope. Inside, photocopies of André's handwriting, his lesson plans, his correspondence with French nationalist organizations. Her son's words advocating for everything his father had killed for. The debt is paid, the man said softly. Your husband's crimes ended with your son's death. The accounting is balanced. But we need to know if you accept this, if you'll let it end here. And if I don't, then we go to the police, show them these documents, show them that your son was killed not as an innocent victim, but as an active participant in colonial oppression. His name will be destroyed. His legacy will be filth. That's the alternative. They left her standing in the doorway with André's crimes in her hands. Émilie went back inside, read every document, examined every photograph, looking for proof of forgery, finding none. The letters sat on her desk, ready to mail, ready to expose Philippe's crimes, to force France to confront its past. But what good would it do? Philippe was dead. André was dead. The war was over. All she'd accomplished was prolonging the cycle, forcing these men to pay for their revenge, their children to grow up fatherless, nursing new grievances, planning new revenge. When did it end? Émilie took the letters and the documents to her kitchen sink, struck a match, watched them burn. All of it. The evidence, the photographs, the confessions, the proof. She burned 40 years of crimes until there was nothing left but ash. Then she took André's skull and carried it to the cemetery. Philippe was buried in the section reserved for veterans. His grave was modest, just a stone with his name and dates. The military had wanted to give him honors. Émilie had refused. She knelt in the frozen earth and began to dig. It took hours. Her hands bled. Her back screamed, but she dug until she reached Philippe's coffin, until she could set André's skull on the lid. Father and son, reunited. Stay together, she told them. Rot together. Let that be enough. She filled the hole, smoothed the earth, walked away. Émilie Bisset lived another 15 years. She never spoke of André, never mentioned the skull, never told anyone what had happened that Christmas. When she died in 2003, at 91, They found her apartment empty of photographs or mementos. Spartan, clean, as if she'd already been preparing to leave. The only personal item was a list in her husband's handwriting. Names, dates, crimes. Someone had drawn lines through every name, and beside each line, a date. The last date was December 22nd, 1988. The day Andre's skull arrived. The day the accounting ended. Or continued, depending on whether you asked the living or the dead.